I am Jessica Harrison, a 28-year-old marketing specialist who never imagined my career at TechVista Inc. would end with me taking down the entire executive team. I was good at my job, exceeded targets consistently, yet found myself unexpectedly fired one Tuesday afternoon. Our CEO, Brian Matthews, smirked as he told me not to worry. They would not contest my unemployment claim. What he never anticipated was how my simple benefits application would expose years of financial fraud. If you are watching this video about workplace justice, drop a comment telling me where you are watching from, hit that like button, and subscribe to hear how my simple paperwork exposed a criminal enterprise hiding in plain sight. My journey to TechVista began after graduating with a marketing degree from State University. I had interned at a few smaller companies, built a decent portfolio, and was thrilled when I landed an interview at TechVista. The company had been making waves in the tech industry with their innovative customer relationship management software. During my 3 years there, I watched as we grew from a company of 50 employees to over 200, with ambitious plans to expand internationally within the next year. When I started, I was immediately assigned to work under Laura Wilson, the marketing director. Laura was everything you could want in a manager. She was supportive, knowledgeable, and always willing to go to bat for her team. She took me under her wing, helping me navigate the corporate landscape and develop my skills. Under her guidance, I thrived, quickly becoming one of the top performers in our department. The company had several key players that I interacted with regularly. Stephanie Miller was the HR director, a nervous woman who always seemed to be walking on eggshells, especially around the executives. I often noticed how she would fidget with her wedding ring whenever difficult questions came up in meetings. Daniel Peterson, our CFO, was a different story altogether. He controlled information with an iron grip, insisting that all financial queries go through him personally, regardless of how minor. His department operated like a separate entity within the company with very little transparency. I also formed close friendships with Emily Turner from the graphics team and Michael Rodriguez from product development. We often had lunch together, comparing notes about the company culture and supporting each other through difficult projects. From the outside, TechVista looked like a dream workplace. We had the requisite ping-pong tables, free snacks, and casual Fridays. Our CEO, Brian Matthews, was featured in business magazines as an innovative leader disrupting the industry. Our office space was modern and impressive, designed to wow potential clients and new hires. But beneath this carefully crafted image lay a very different reality. Brian ruled the company with unpredictable mood swings and favoritism. Those in his inner circle received promotions and raises regardless of performance, while others could work tirelessly without recognition. He would publicly praise someone one week, then berate them in front of colleagues the next. This created an atmosphere of constant anxiety where employees were perpetually unsure of their standing. Despite these issues, I found myself becoming increasingly invested in the company. My marketing campaigns were successful, bringing in new clients and industry recognition. Within my first year, I was given responsibility for our social media strategy, which I revamped completely. By my second year, I was managing our trade show presence and helping design our quarterly marketing initiatives. My third year brought me into leadership meetings where I started presenting directly to the executive team. It was around this time that I began noticing small financial irregularities. Expense reimbursements that used to be processed within days now took weeks. The annual bonuses that had been promised were postponed with vague explanations about cash flow timing. When I asked Laura about these issues, she would give reassuring but non-specific answers, often changing the subject. I believed in what we were building at TechVista. Our software genuinely helped small businesses manage their customer relationships more effectively. I took pride in marketing a product that delivered real value. This belief in our mission made it easier to overlook the growing red flags, to rationalize the inconsistencies as growing pains of a rapidly expanding company. My office became my second home. I worked long hours, often being among the last to leave the building. I invested in relationships with colleagues across departments, genuinely caring about their success and well-being. When new hires joined, I was often asked to help orient them to company culture and processes. I became known as someone who could get things done, navigate interdepartmental challenges, and maintain positivity, even during stressful times. In retrospect, my dedication to TechVista and my trust in its leadership blinded me to what was happening behind the scenes. I interpreted concerning behaviors as quirks rather than warnings. I accepted explanations that, had I been more objective, would have seemed suspicious. I was in many ways the ideal employee from the perspective of executives engaged in wrongdoing. I worked hard, believed in the company, and did not ask too many difficult questions. Little did I know that my loyalty and work ethic would eventually be rewarded with a sudden termination, and that my simple act of applying for unemployment benefits would unravel years of carefully concealed financial misconduct. The first concrete hint that something was seriously wrong came during the preparation of our quarterly marketing budget reports. As the person responsible for tracking our department spending against projections, I needed accurate financial data. I had been given access to certain financial systems to extract the marketing expense reports. While cross-referencing some numbers for our latest trade show expenses, I noticed something odd. The report I pulled showed we had spent $20,000 on booth construction, but the interdepartmental summary I had received from finance listed the same expense as $30,000. At first, I assumed it was a simple typo or accounting error. I mentioned it casually to Katie Johnson, one of the financial analysts I had become friendly with. Her reaction surprised me. Instead of the casual acknowledgement I expected, she became visibly uncomfortable, avoiding eye contact. As she suggested, I speak directly with Daniel, the CFO, about any discrepancies. When I pressed gently asking if this kind of error was common, she quickly excused herself, claiming she had a meeting to attend. This was my first real indication that something might be systematically wrong, rather than just occasional sloppiness. Over the next few weeks, I began noticing other inconsistencies. Vendor payments that appeared in one report but not another. Revenue figures that seemed to fluctuate depending on who was presenting them and to what audience. During a marketing planning meeting, I asked about the budget for an upcoming product launch. Laura told me we had $45,000 allocated, but when I checked the official budget document later, it showed only $25,000. When I brought this up to Laura privately, she seemed flustered and said something vague about flexible allocations and to just proceed with planning as she had instructed. The executive meetings I attended became increasingly tense. Twice I arrived early to find Brian and Daniel in heated whispered conversations that abruptly ceased when they noticed me. During presentations, I observed Daniel frequently interrupting others when financial details came up, often redirecting or reframing the discussion. Brian would sometimes shoot him warning glances that I pretended not to notice. Laura, who had always been confident and composed, began showing signs of serious stress. She started canceling our regular one-on-one meetings, claiming to be too busy. When we did meet, she seemed distracted and anxious. Once I noticed her hands trembling as she reviewed a budget proposal I had prepared. When I asked if everything was all right, she gave me a tight smile and said, "Just the usual executive pressures. Nothing for you to worry about." Then came the company-wide announcement about restructuring and optimizing operations. Brian held an all-hands meeting where he spoke in corporate platitudes about streamlining for growth and aligning resources with strategic objectives. The language was vague, but the undertone was clear. Changes were coming, and not everyone would be happy about them. Despite these concerning signs, I remained dedicated to my work. I had built strong relationships with several of our key clients, and I felt responsible for maintaining those connections. My marketing campaigns continued to perform well, and I received positive feedback from customers and industry peers alike. I told myself that all growing companies go through difficult transitions, and that my job was to keep doing excellent work regardless of the internal politics. One evening, working late to finish a presentation, I heard raised voices coming from the CFO's office. The door was partially open, and I could clearly hear Brian and Daniel arguing. Brian was saying, "We cannot keep shifting things around like this. Eventually, someone will notice." Daniel replied with something I could not quite make out, but the tone was defensive and agitated. When Brian responded with, "Just make it work for one more quarter," I realized I was overhearing something I was not meant to. That night, I made a decision that would ultimately change everything. I began keeping detailed notes of the inconsistencies I observed, saving copies of contradictory reports and documenting unusual interactions. I did not know exactly what was happening, but my instincts told me to create a paper trail. I did not share my concerns with anyone, not even Emily or Michael, partly out of loyalty to the company, and partly because I did not want to seem paranoid. A week later, all employees received an email from HR asking us to sign updated non-disclosure agreements. The new documents included expanded confidentiality clauses and stronger non-disparagement language. Stephanie personally visited departments to collect signed copies, emphasizing that these updates were standard practice for growing companies. When I asked about specific changes from our previous agreements, she became flustered and suggested I direct legal questions to our general counsel while making it clear that signing promptly was expected. I signed the agreement as did everyone else. What choice did we have? But the timing coming so soon after overhearing that argument felt ominous. Something was happening at Tech Vista, something the leadership wanted to ensure remained hidden. I just never expected that I would be the one to ultimately expose it all. The day that changed everything started like any other. I arrived at the office at 8:30 a.m., grabbed my usual coffee from the break room and settled in to check emails before a 9:30 client call. At 9:15, my phone rang. It was Stephanie from HR asking if I could come to the executive conference room immediately. When I asked what it was regarding, she simply said, "Brian needs to speak with you. Please come right away." My heart raced as I made my way to the conference room. Was this about the budget questions I had been asking? Had someone found my documented inconsistencies? Or was it something positive? Perhaps the promotion Laura had hinted might be coming my way. When I entered the room, I immediately sensed something was wrong. Brian sat at the head of the table, his face a mask of professional detachment. Daniel, the CFO, sat to his right, not meeting my eyes. Stephanie stood near the door, clutching a folder to her chest. Laura, my direct manager, was conspicuously absent. "Jessica, please have a seat." Brian gestured to a chair across from him. As I sat down, Brian cleared his throat and launched into what sounded like a rehearsed speech. "Jessica, we have been reviewing the organizational structure and performance metrics across all departments. After careful consideration, we have determined that your position is being eliminated as part of our restructuring efforts." I felt as though the air had been sucked from the room. Just last week, Brian had publicly praised my work on our latest campaign. "I do not understand," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. "My performance reviews have all been excellent. Laura just told me last month that I was exceeding expectations." Brian's expression hardened slightly. "This is not a performance-based decision. This is a strategic realignment of resources." "But the marketing department is understaffed as it is," I countered. "We have been asking for additional headcount for months. How does eliminating my position align with our growth strategy?" Daniel jumped in. "The financial aspects of these decisions are complex and based on factors beyond individual performance." Something about his tone triggered my suspicion. "Is Laura aware of this decision?" I asked. Brian and Daniel exchanged a quick glance. "Laura was consulted on departmental restructuring," Brian said carefully. I knew then that Laura had either not been informed or had opposed my termination. Either way, they had deliberately excluded her from this meeting. For the next 20 minutes, I defended my work and asked for specific explanations. Each question was met with vague responses and corporate doublespeak. Brian became increasingly irritated by my persistence while Daniel kept checking his watch. Stephanie remained silent, her discomfort evident in her rigid posture. Finally, Brian leaned forward with a smile that did not reach his eyes. "Look, Jessica, to show there are no hard feelings, we will not contest your unemployment claim. You can file right away and we will confirm your employment dates. You will receive 2 weeks of severance pay and we will need you to sign this separation agreement." He nodded to Stephanie, who slid a document across the table. The condescension in his tone was unmistakable. He was not offering me a favor. He was dismissing me as quickly and quietly as possible. I glanced at the agreement, noting language about confidentiality and non-disparagement, similar to the recently updated NDA. "I will need time to review this document before signing," I said, regaining my composure. Brian's smile faltered slightly. "Of course, you can take it with you, but we will need it back, signed by tomorrow, to process your final paycheck and severance." "I understand you are upset." Stephanie finally spoke, her voice gentle. "This is difficult news. Tom from security will help you collect your personal items and escort you out." The humiliation of being escorted out by security, as if I were a threat, rather than a dedicated employee of 3 years, was almost too much to bear. Tom, a kind older man who had always greeted me warmly each morning, now looked uncomfortable as he followed me to my desk. "Just procedure," he whispered apologetically as I packed my photos, coffee mug, and the small plant Emily had given me for my birthday. As I walked through the office, I could feel the stares of my colleagues, their whispered questions. Michael started to approach, but stopped when Tom shook his head slightly. The message was clear: I was now an outsider, contaminated by whatever caused my termination. Outside the building, I sat in my car, hands shaking too badly to insert the key into the ignition. A tap on the window startled me. It was Emily, who had slipped out a side entrance. "I only have a minute," she said after I rolled down the window. "I cannot believe they did this. Laura is furious. She was called into a meeting with Brian right after you were escorted out." "Did they give her any explanation?" I asked. Emily shook her head. "Not one that makes sense. But there are rumors flying. 3 people from finance were let go last week, all quietly. Katie Johnson quit yesterday with no notice. Something weird is going on." A security guard appeared at the entrance, looking around the parking lot. Emily spotted him and quickly said, "I have to go. Call me tonight." She hurried back toward the building, using a different entrance than where the guard was standing. The drive home passed in a blur. My apartment felt alien in the middle of a workday, too quiet and empty. I moved mechanically, changing out of my work clothes into sweatpants and a t-shirt. Then I sat on my couch and finally allowed the tears to come. That evening was a roller coaster of emotions. Disbelief gave way to anger, then to crushing self-doubt. Had I missed something? Had my performance actually been lacking? Was I asking too many questions? Or was I collateral damage in some larger corporate game I did not understand? After hours of this emotional spiral, I made a decision. I would not sign their separation agreement tomorrow, at least not without having an attorney review it first. And I would file for unemployment benefits, immediately, taking Brian up on his smug offer not to contest my claim. Little did I know that this simple decision would be the first domino in a chain reaction that would bring down the entire house of cards. The morning after my termination, instead of signing and returning the separation agreement as instructed, I began researching the unemployment benefits process for my state. The website outlined the qualifications, weekly benefit amounts, and documentation requirements. As a full-time employee who had been laid off through no fault of my own, I clearly qualified. The online application was straightforward, but required detailed information about my employment history, including dates, compensation, and reason for separation. I gathered my most recent pay stubs, my last 2 W-2 tax forms, and the employee handbook that contained TechVista's official policies. As I carefully entered my salary information, something caught my attention. The W-2 from the previous year showed a total income of $76,000, which matched my understanding of my compensation package. However, when I reviewed my pay stubs from the same period, adding up the biweekly amounts, the total came to only $68,000, a discrepancy of $8,000. At first, I thought I had made a calculation error. I recounted meticulously, using a spreadsheet to track each payment. The numbers still did not match. Then I remembered the quarterly bonuses I had received. Perhaps those explained the difference, but when I added those in based on the deposits to my bank account, the total still fell short of what the W-2 reported. This made no sense. Why would my W-2 report more income than I had actually received? If anything, I would expect companies to underreport income to reduce tax liability, not overreport it. Curious now, I dug deeper into my files. I found the offer letter from when I started at TechVista, which outlined my starting salary and bonus structure. I compared this with subsequent promotion letters and merit increase notifications. When I calculated what my actual earnings should have been based on these official documents, the number aligned with my pay stubs, not my W-2. I called my friend Nicole Taylor, who worked as an accountant at a different company. Without mentioning TechVista by name, I explained the discrepancy I had found. "That sounds very strange," Nicole said after I explained the situation. "Companies sometimes make accounting errors, but this pattern is concerning. If they are reporting higher income to the IRS than they actually paid you, they could be inflating their expenses to reduce their taxable corporate income. Or they could be shifting money around for other reasons. None of them good." "Could it just be a mistake?" I asked, still wanting to believe the best about my former employer. "Once is a mistake. A pattern across multiple reporting periods suggests something else." Nicole's voice became more serious. "If I were you, I would document everything carefully. This could potentially be tax fraud." Tax fraud. The words sent a chill through me. Was this connected to my termination, to the arguments I had overheard between Brian and Daniel, to the financial inconsistencies I had been noticing? I spent the rest of the day meticulously documenting everything. I created a spreadsheet showing the reported W-2 income versus my actual received income for each quarter I had been employed. I scanned my offer letter promotion notifications, pay stubs, and tax documents. I wrote detailed notes about the financial discrepancies I had observed while still employed. Then came the decision point. What should I submit to the unemployment office? The inflated income figure from my W-2 would result in higher unemployment benefits, since these are typically calculated as a percentage of previous earnings. But submitting information I knew to be incorrect felt wrong, possibly even illegal on my part. More importantly, I now suspected my termination might be connected to these financial irregularities. Perhaps someone had realized I was noticing the inconsistencies. If that was the case, I wanted a clean record of having acted with complete integrity. I decided to submit my actual income documentation, including my detailed spreadsheet showing the discrepancies between reported and received income. In the comments section of the application, I noted, "Please be advised that there are inconsistencies between my W-2 forms and my actual received income as documented by pay stubs and bank deposits. I have provided both sets of documentation for transparency." 3 days after submitting my application, I received a phone call from the unemployment office. The claims specialist, Samantha Williams, had several follow-up questions. "Ms. Harrison, we are reviewing your unemployment claim and have some questions about the income documentation you provided." She began, her tone professional, but curious. "Of course," I replied. I tried to be as thorough as possible. "You noted discrepancies between your W-2 and your actual received income. Can you elaborate on that?" I explained the situation in detail, walking her through my spreadsheet calculations and the documentation I had provided. "Have you noticed other financial irregularities at your former employer?" she asked. The question gave me pause. Should I mention the budget discrepancies I had documented, the overheard conversations? After a moment of consideration, I decided complete honesty was my best approach. "Yes," I admitted. "In my role as marketing specialist, I had access to certain financial reports. I noticed inconsistencies in budget figures and expense reporting across different internal documents." "Did you bring these concerns to anyone's attention while employed there?" I asked questions about specific discrepancies to my direct supervisor and to members of the finance team. Shortly after beginning to inquire about these issues, I was terminated. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Ms. Harrison," Samantha finally said, "based on the information you have provided, I believe your case needs to be reviewed by our Special Investigations Unit. This is not common for unemployment claims, but the documentation you have submitted raises questions that go beyond a standard benefits determination." My heart raced. Does this mean my unemployment claim is denied? Not at all. Your claim will continue to be processed. However, the income reporting discrepancies may need to be investigated separately. Someone from our office will be in touch within the next few days. After we hung up, I sat in stunned silence. What had I started? I had simply filed for benefits I was entitled to, and now there was talk of a special investigation. A small part of me worried that I had somehow made a mistake, that there was an innocent explanation for everything I had found. But a larger part knew something was seriously wrong at Tech Vista, and that my simple unemployment claim had accidentally pulled at a thread that might unravel something much bigger. 2 days after my call with Samantha, I received an official email from the state unemployment office. The message informed me that while my unemployment benefits had been approved, the documentation I had submitted had been referred to the State Department of Revenue and the Department of Labor for further review. The email included contact information for Anthony Rivera, an auditor with the state who would be handling the review. I immediately began researching what this meant. State audits of businesses could be triggered by various factors, including complaints, unusual financial patterns, or random selection. Given the timing, it seemed clear my unemployment filing had raised red flags. After consulting with Nicole again, I decided to seek professional legal advice. She recommended Alicia Fernandez, a labor attorney with experience in whistleblower cases. I was not sure if I qualified as a whistleblower, having never intentionally reported Tech Vista for wrongdoing, but the situation clearly required expert guidance. Alicia agreed to meet with me the following day. Her office was small but professional, with diplomas and certifications covering one wall. After I explained the situation, she listened thoughtfully before responding. "Based on what you have described, Jessica, the discrepancies you found likely indicate potential tax fraud and labor violations," she said. "The fact that your unemployment filing triggered a referral to state auditors suggests the issues may be significant." "Am I in any legal jeopardy?" I asked. voicing my biggest fear. I did not intend to report them or cause trouble. Alicia shook her head. You have done nothing wrong. You filed for benefits you are entitled to and provided accurate documentation. In fact, by noting the discrepancies rather than just submitting the inflated W-2 figures, you demonstrated transparency and good faith. What happens next? The state auditors will likely conduct a thorough review of TechVista's financial records, tax filings, and employment practices. If they find evidence of deliberate misconduct, they may expand their investigation to include federal agencies like the IRS or Department of Labor. Should I cooperate if they contact me? Absolutely, Alicia said firmly. But I would advise having legal representation present for any formal interviews or depositions. This protects your interests and ensures your statements are accurately recorded. I hired Alicia on the spot, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders. Having professional guidance through this unexpected situation gave me confidence I was not navigating it alone. The following week, I received a call from Anthony Rivera, the state auditor. He requested a meeting to discuss my employment at TechVista and the documentation I had provided with my unemployment claim. With Alicia's guidance, I agreed to meet at her office rather than at my home or a government building. Anthony arrived with a colleague, Sandra Williams. Both were professionally dressed and carried leather portfolios filled with documents. After introductions and preliminary explanations of the process, they began asking detailed questions about my employment history, compensation structure, and the discrepancies I had identified. When did you first notice financial irregularities at TechVista? Sandra asked. I described the budget discrepancies I had stumbled upon, the conflicting reports, and the increasing secrecy around financial matters. Did you maintain copies of these contradictory documents? Anthony asked. Yes, I replied, relieved that I had been thorough in my documentation. I have electronic copies of several reports showing different figures for the same expenses. Their interest visibly increased. Anthony leaned forward. Would you be willing to provide these documents to our investigation? After a quick glance at Alicia, who nodded, I agreed. I can email them to you today. For the next 2 hours, they asked increasingly detailed questions about TechVista's operations management structure and financial practices. They were particularly interested in the company's rapid growth, international expansion plans, and the recent restructuring that had resulted in my termination and the departure of several finance team members. As the interview progressed, I noticed Sandra taking extensive notes, especially when I mentioned specific dates, dollar amounts, and names of executives involved. Anthony's questions became more pointed, suggesting they already had information from other sources that aligned with what I was sharing. Near the end of our meeting, Anthony said something that confirmed my suspicions. Ms. Harrison, I want to thank you for your cooperation today. The information you have provided corroborates patterns we have identified through other channels. What began as a review of potential income reporting discrepancies has expanded into a broader investigation. What does that mean exactly? I asked. Sandra and Anthony exchanged glances before Sandra responded. We cannot share specifics of an ongoing investigation, but I can tell you that based on the documentation you provided with your unemployment claim, combined with other information we have received, we have grounds to conduct a full audit of TechVista's financial records and employment practices. After they left, Alicia turned to me with raised eyebrows. That was more significant than I anticipated. When they mentioned corroboration through other channels that suggests they have received similar reports from other former employees. Katie Johnson, I said, suddenly remembering, the financial analyst who quit abruptly, and the 3 finance team members who were let go before me. They might have seen the same issues I did, or worse. Exactly, Alicia nodded. This is no longer just about your unemployment claim. The state is building a case, and your documentation is a key piece of evidence. Over the next 2 weeks, my life fell into a strange new pattern. I continued applying for jobs while receiving unemployment benefits. I had several promising interviews, but felt reluctant to accept a position until I understood my potential obligations in the TechVista investigation. Then one afternoon, I received another call from Anthony Rivera. Miss Harrison, we would like to inform you that based on our preliminary findings, the investigation into TechVista has been expanded to include federal authorities. The IRS Criminal Investigation Division and the Department of Labor have joined our inquiry. My breath caught. Criminal Investigation Division. Does that mean criminal charges are being considered? It means the evidence suggests potential criminal violations of tax and labor laws, he replied carefully. We cannot discuss specific findings at this stage, but we wanted you to be aware of the development. What does this mean for me? I asked. At this point, you are considered a cooperating witness. Your documentation and testimony have been extremely valuable. We may need you to provide a formal deposition in the near future. After this call, Alicia advised me to maintain complete confidentiality about the investigation. Criminal tax investigations can take months or even years, she explained. The authorities will be gathering evidence, interviewing witnesses, and building their case methodically. Despite this advice, word began to spread. I started receiving text messages and calls from former colleagues at Tech Vista. Some were merely curious, having heard rumors about an investigation. Others seemed genuinely concerned, wondering if they might be implicated or called to testify. A few expressed gratitude, suggesting they had also observed problematic practices, but had felt powerless to address them. Michael called to tell me that government officials had been seen entering the Tech Vista offices, requesting documents and conducting interviews. Emily reported that Brian and Daniel were rarely seen in the office anymore, with meetings being handled by lower-level executives. Laura sent a carefully worded email expressing support but avoiding any mention of the investigation. One evening, my phone rang with an unknown number. When I answered, a familiar voice spoke. "Jessica, this is Katie Johnson from Tech Vista. I heard you might be involved in the investigation." "Katie," I said, surprised. "I cannot really discuss anything." "I understand," she said quickly. "I just wanted you to know that I have also been contacted by investigators. I left because I could not continue participating in what was happening there. The things they asked me to do." She trailed off. "Have you spoken with them?" I asked. "Yes. I have provided documents and testimony." Her voice lowered. "What they were doing with the books was far worse than what you probably saw in marketing. The tax evasion, the double accounting, the misrepresentation to investors. It was systematic." This conversation confirmed what I had begun to suspect. My accidental discovery through my unemployment claim had opened the door to exposing large-scale financial fraud at Tech Vista. What had begun as my personal setback was evolving into something that would have far-reaching consequences for everyone associated with the company. 3 months after filing my unemployment claim, I received a formal request to attend a meeting at Tech Vista's offices. The request came from the lead investigator with the State Department of Revenue, who explained that they needed me present for a formal presentation of findings to the company executives. Alicia would accompany me as my legal counsel. Returning to the building where I had spent 3 years of my career felt surreal. The receptionist Judy did a double take when she saw me walk in with Alicia and the state investigators. Her eyes widened in recognition before she quickly composed herself and directed us to the main conference room on the executive floor. As we rode the elevator, I felt a strange mix of vindication and anxiety. The last time I had been in this building, I had been escorted out by security, humiliated and confused. Now I was returning as a key witness in what had apparently become a major financial crimes investigation. The conference room was already crowded when we entered. On one side sat a group I recognized as Tech Vista executives, including Brian and Daniel, both looking pale and tense. Laura was there too, seated slightly apart from the others, her expression unreadable. Several people I did not recognize, presumably legal counsel and advisors, flanked the executives. On the other side of the table sat representatives from various government agencies. Anthony and Sandra were there, along with people identified as being from the IRS Criminal Investigation Division, the Department of Labor, and the State Attorney General's office. Brian's eyes locked with mine as I entered, his expression flickering between anger and fear before settling into a forced neutral mask. Daniel stared fixedly at the table, refusing to look up. After introductions, Harold Bennett, who I recognized as Tech Vista's general counsel, requested a preliminary meeting with just the government representatives before proceeding. "We would like to understand the scope and nature of this inquiry before engaging in a full discussion," he said smoothly. The lead investigator agreed, and Harold was provided with a thick folder of documents. "This contains our preliminary findings and the basis for our investigation," the investigator explained. Harold began reviewing the documents methodically, his expression professional and controlled. Then he turned a page and froze. His eyes widened slightly as he scanned the content. He flipped to the next page, then the next, his composure visibly cracking. When he reached a particular document, he paused, studying it intently. I recognized it as a copy of my unemployment, filing with its attached spreadsheet showing the income discrepancies. The room had fallen completely silent, all eyes on Harold as he slowly lowered the papers. He turned to look directly at Brian, his expression, now one of barely controlled anger and disbelief. "This is not an audit," he said, his voice cutting through the silence. "This is a criminal investigation." The effect of his words was immediate. Daniel made a choked sound while Brian's face flushed red. Laura closed her eyes briefly as if confirming something she had long suspected. Harold continued, now addressing the investigators rather than his clients. "I would like to request a brief recess to confer with my clients before proceeding." "Of course," the lead investigator replied. "But I should inform everyone present that based on the evidence we have gathered, including documentation provided by multiple witnesses, we are preparing to present formal charges of tax fraud, financial statement, fraud, labor violations, and obstruction of justice." As we filed out to allow TechVista's executives to confer with their attorney, Brian suddenly stood and pointed at me. "She has no idea what she is talking about. She was just a marketing person. This is retaliation for being fired." Before I could respond, the lead IRS investigator stepped between us. "Mr. Matthews, I strongly advise you not to make accusations against witnesses. Miss Harrison's documentation was merely one piece of evidence that led to this investigation. We have gathered substantial additional evidence from multiple sources, including former financial staff banking records and internal company documents." Daniel, who had remained silent until now, suddenly turned on Brian. "You said we could fix this. You said nobody would notice the adjustments if we kept them under the reporting thresholds." Harold quickly intervened, physically placing himself between Daniel and Brian. "Not another word from either of you," he hissed before ushering them into a side room. During the recess, I sat in a small waiting area with Alicia. "What happens now?" I asked her. "Based on what we just witnessed, their attorney will likely advise them to cooperate," she replied. "The evidence appears substantial, and the government clearly has built a strong case. They will probably negotiate plea agreements in exchange for cooperation." When we reconvened an hour later, the atmosphere had changed dramatically. Harold announced that his clients would cooperate fully with the investigation. Brian and Daniel sat stone-faced as the lead investigator outlined the allegations against them and the company. According to the investigation, TechVista had been engaged in systematic financial fraud for at least 4 years. They had maintained 2 sets of books, one for tax authorities and investors, showing inflated expenses and revenues, and another reflecting actual operations. They had misreported employee income, manipulated revenue recognition timing, and created fictitious expenses. The fraud had apparently begun as an effort to make the company appear more profitable to potential investors, then expanded to include tax evasion as the company grew. My termination, along with those of several finance team members, had been part of an effort to remove employees who might have noticed the discrepancies. My unemployment filing, with its careful documentation of income inconsistencies, had provided investigators with their first concrete evidence that something was amiss. As the meeting concluded, Brian was informed that he and Daniel would need to surrender their passports and remain available for further questioning. The company's financial records were being seized, and a forensic accounting team would be conducting a comprehensive audit. On our way out, Laura approached me in the hallway. "Jessica," she said quietly, "I had no idea about any of this. When they fired you, I protested, but they overruled me. I never imagined it was connected to financial fraud." "Did you know they were reporting different numbers in different places?" I asked. She shook her head. "I knew our department budgets kept changing, but Daniel always had explanations. I trusted the finance team to handle the numbers correctly." She paused. "I should have asked more questions when things did not add up. I am sorry I did not protect you better." As we left the building, I felt strangely hollow. The vindication of seeing Brian and Daniel facing consequences for their actions was overshadowed by sadness for all the innocent employees whose livelihoods were now at risk because of executive misconduct. TechVista had been more than just a job to me. It had been a community, a place where I had formed meaningful relationships and developed professionally. Now that community was fractured, possibly beyond repair. What had begun with my simple unemployment claim had snowballed into something far larger than I could have imagined. A routine benefits application had accidentally exposed years of financial misconduct, triggering an investigation that would ultimately result in criminal charges, massive fines, and the likely collapse of the company I had once been proud to work for. The year following the confrontation at Tech Vista was a whirlwind of legal proceedings, media coverage, and personal adjustment. Brian and Daniel were both indicted on multiple counts of tax fraud, securities fraud, and obstruction of justice. After initially pleading not guilty, they eventually accepted plea deals in exchange for reduced sentences. Brian was sentenced to 5 years in federal prison, while Daniel received 3 years for his cooperation with prosecutors. Tech Vista itself did not survive the scandal. After the investigation became public, clients began withdrawing, investors sued, and the stock price collapsed. Within 6 months, the company declared bankruptcy and was eventually acquired by a competitor for a fraction of its former valuation. Throughout this period, I was called to testify multiple times, first in depositions, then before a grand jury, and finally at sentencing hearings. Each time I recounted the same story, how I had noticed financial discrepancies, been terminated shortly after asking questions, and then discovered more significant issues while filing for unemployment benefits. The experience of testifying was both empowering and draining. I felt a responsibility to speak truth to power, to represent the many employees who had been unwittingly drawn into Brian and Daniel's schemes. Yet facing them in courtrooms, seeing their families in the gallery, and witnessing their fall from respected executives to convicted felons brought me no joy. Many former Tech Vista employees reached out to me during this time. Some had found new positions quickly, while others struggled in a job market suddenly suspicious of anyone associated with the company. We formed an informal support network, sharing job leads, providing references for each other, and processing our shared trauma. Katie Johnson became a particular ally. Having worked in the finance department, she had seen even more of the fraud than I had, and carried a heavier burden of knowledge. I should have spoken up sooner, she confessed during one of our coffee meetings. I knew what they were doing was wrong, but I was afraid of losing my job. We all were, I reassured her. They created a culture of fear precisely to prevent people from questioning them. 4 months after my termination, I received a job offer from a smaller but well-respected software company. My new employer, Maura Sullivan, had followed the Tech Vista case in the news and was impressed by my integrity. "We need more people willing to stand up for what is right, even when it is difficult," she told me during my interview. My new position as marketing director offered more responsibility and better compensation than I had at Tech Vista. More importantly, the company culture emphasized transparency and ethical business practices. Financial reports were shared openly with department heads, and questions were encouraged rather than deflected. Still, rebuilding my professional confidence took time. For months after starting my new job, I second-guessed myself, worried about overstepping, and flinched whenever I was called to unexpected meetings. The trauma of my sudden termination and the chaos that followed had left deep emotional scars. With encouragement from friends and a good therapist, I gradually began to heal. I learned to trust my instincts again, to speak up when something seemed wrong, and to value my own ethical compass above any corporate culture. About 6 months into my new position, I received an email from Laura. She had landed on her feet as a vice president at a startup and wanted to reconnect. Over dinner, she expressed both gratitude and regret. "You probably saved dozens of careers by exposing what was happening when you did," she said. "If it had continued much longer, the company would have collapsed even more spectacularly, and the fallout would have been worse for everyone. I never intended to bring down the company," I admitted. "I just wanted my unemployment benefits." Laura smiled sadly. "Sometimes the smallest actions have the biggest consequences. You did the right thing by being honest, even when it would have been easier not to be." As the legal proceedings wound down, and media interest in the case faded, I found myself increasingly approached by people facing ethical dilemmas in their own workplaces. Some had noticed financial irregularities similar to what I had seen at Tech Vista. Others were experiencing retaliation for raising concerns about company practices. Recognizing a need for support among workplace whistleblowers, I started a small monthly meetup group. What began as informal gatherings of 5 or 6 people grew into a network of over 100 professionals committed to ethical business practices. We shared resources, offered emotional support, and sometimes connected people with legal advice when needed. Through this group, I met Julian Wright, a former compliance officer who had exposed safety violations at a manufacturing company. His courage in the face of intense pressure inspired me, and our shared experiences created a bond that eventually blossomed into romance. Having a partner who truly understood the complex emotions associated with whistleblowing helped heal parts of me I had not realized were still wounded. 2 years after filing my fateful unemployment claim, I received a letter from the State Attorney General's office. They were creating a task force on corporate fraud prevention and wanted me to serve as a citizen advisor. Your experience provides valuable insight into how fraud is concealed and how employees can be empowered to report concerns, the letter stated. I accepted the position, seeing it as an opportunity to help create systemic changes that might prevent others from experiencing what I and my TechVista colleagues had endured. Looking back now, I can see how that moment of unemployment filing became a fulcrum that levered my life in an entirely new direction. What began as a routine benefits application following an unjust termination evolved into a criminal investigation that exposed years of fraud. The path was not one I would have chosen, but it led me to greater professional success, meaningful relationships, and a deeper understanding of my own strength and values. I often think about Brian and Daniel serving their sentences in federal prison. Their intelligence and business acumen could have built something truly valuable had they operated ethically. Instead, their shortcuts and deceptions cost them their freedom reputations and the very success they had been trying to inflate. The most important lesson I learned through this ordeal is that integrity is not just a personal virtue, but a practical necessity. In the short term, speaking truth may seem costly. You might lose a job, face retaliation, or be labeled a troublemaker. But in the long run, the alternative is far more expensive. Living with compromised values, participating in deception, or remaining silent in the face of wrongdoing extracts a toll on your spirit that no salary can compensate for. If you have witnessed workplace misconduct or feel pressured to participate in unethical practices, know that you are not alone. There are resources, legal protections, and communities of support available to you. Your courage in speaking up might not only save your own integrity, but protect countless others from harm. Have you ever noticed something wrong at work but were afraid to speak up? Or have you taken a stand for what is right despite the personal cost? Share your experiences in the comments below. Your story might give someone else the courage they need. And if you found value in my journey, please like this video and subscribe to the channel for more stories of workplace justice and personal resilience. Remember, sometimes the smallest actions, like filing for unemployment benefits, can lead to the biggest changes. Thank you for listening, and may you find the strength to stand firm in your values, whatever challenges you face.